Tonight's forum is called the Save Our Papers Summit. It may sound dramatic, but unfortunately it's very accurate. All of our newspapers, owned by Tribune Publishing, are at great risk. A predatory hedge fund, Alden Global Capital, is working to take over our company. If Alden is able to buy out Tribune Publishing, our papers will cease to exist the way that they are today. Alden doesn't care about journalism. Alden doesn't care about our communities. What Alden cares about is profit, and that's it. In the 17 months since Alden Global Capital purchased 32% of Tribune Publishing stock, our papers have suffered. Our coverage has suffered. All the while, Tribune, guided by Alden, has raked in millions. We were faced with a decision to accept the inevitable or stand up and fight. We have been working for months to raise awareness about Alden, connect with our community allies, and find investors committed to sustainable, community-based, civic-minded, nonprofit models for our newspapers. Tonight, we'll host expert speakers who can attest to Alden's destruction, hear from our readers and allies why our papers need to be saved, and share a ray of hope. We'll also share ways that you can help us, because your support as community allies is so important. You can help us be part of the solution to saving local news. Part of our program tonight, you'll see up in the corner, is a Q&A function. If you have any questions as we go through this presentation, feel free to add a question there. And at the end of the evening, we'll have a time to address some of those questions and hopefully answer them for you. Louisa, could you please introduce our first speaker?
Thank you, Jen. From Chicago, I am from the Chicago Tribune Guild, and I want to thank you in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and our speakers across the country, and you, yes, you, who has joined us from your community, who thinks it's important enough to know why we need to save our papers. An important voice in our fight is our first speaker, Cathy Lewis, host of HearSay with Cathy Lewis on WHRV Public Radio in Hampton Roads, Virginia, who will share her thoughts on why it's so important to save our papers, including the Virginian pilot. Cathy.
Thank you, Louisa. You know, I've spent the last 25 years hosting this public radio talk show, and I can tell you that if it were not for our newspapers, those would be very thin conversations indeed. Our newspapers, as do yours, take the time to fact check and produce work that has integrity. It's really something that's in the DNA of the Virginian Pilot, and I just want to take a couple of seconds to tell you why I love this paper so much. It published its first edition in November of 1865, and if you're a history buff, you will know that that was about 7 months after the end of the Civil War. What you may not know is that Norfolk was at that point a defeated city, and it had spent much of the war under martial law. So now comes the Virginian Pilot. And you probably wouldn't be surprised that in a seafaring city 90 miles east of the Confederate capital, many of our stories that have shaped this community have to do with race. But what might surprise you is the early and courageous leadership of the Virginian Pilot. In 1929, when lynching was a very common practice, taking 90 lives, most of them African American, the Virginian Pilot won a Pulitzer Prize for its editorials against lynching. That was a courageous stance. In 1959, rather than follow an order for court-ordered integration of the schools, the city of Norfolk opted to close its schools to protest that court order. That was called massive integration. And it was the Virginian Pilot that won another Pulitzer for editorializing against massive resistance. And it went one step further. The publisher organized the business community to publish full-page ads during that period, urging city leaders to reopen the schools, and they did. That's a paper we knew and loved. But in 2018, the owners of the Virginian Pilot sold it to Tribune Publishing, which already owned the neighboring Daily Press. And the numbers from this very week tell the story. Today, the Virginian Pilot and Daily Press newsrooms have half the reporters they did just 2.5 years ago when Tribune purchased the company. And I think we'll hear tonight those numbers may get worse. Design and printing have been outsourced. Deadlines are earlier. There's one reporter covering the General Assembly and the governor's office. And my friends, we legalized marijuana and did away with the death penalty in this session. So there's not a lot going on in Richmond that merits coverage. All that remains here is a core of truly dedicated, talented professionals working from home, not because of COVID, but because their offices have been sold. In fact, if you hurry, you can buy a condo in what was 18 months ago, the Pilot's newsroom. Our community values newspapers. Our reporters continue to break important stories, and our photographers continue to document the important moments in our life together. And I know that's happening in every single community that's represented here tonight. We are looking for hope, and we are ready to help. We understand the value of local newspapers in making change, in calling out corruption, and in upholding community values. And we know that's not something we can do burrowed in chat rooms. So tonight's presentation tells us that we are not alone, that there is comfort in that, and there's also strength in that. So we look forward to learning more about what's happened so far and what may come. Because if newspapers have taught us anything, it's that knowledge is power. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you tonight. Back to you, Louisa.
Thank you, Cathy. That was terrific. Thank you so much. The next part of our forum tonight is a slideshow. And what we did was we put together a timeline of what has transpired at our newspapers since Alden bought stock in November 2019. Our timeline tonight is narrated by Wendy Fox Weber, who is the entertainment editor for the Chicago suburban newspapers.
November 2019, Alden Global Capital purchased 32% of Tribune Publishing stock, making it the company's majority shareholder. Tribune board approves cash dividend, pays out $9 million. December 2019, Tribune Publishing announces it's closing Hoy, Chicago's largest Spanish language newspaper. January 2020, Tim Knight steps down as CEO, president, and board chairman, effective January 31st. Chief Financial Officer Terry Jimenez assumes the top job. February 2020, Tribune buyouts are completed, and we say goodbye to many of our most veteran journalists. Tribune pays shareholders cash dividend of $9.3 million. March 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic begins. The company rejects requests to provide paid leave to employees who become sick while reporting on the pandemic, telling them to use their paid time off instead. Employees are instructed to work from home. As of March 29, Tribune reports about $49 million in cash. April 2020, the Virginian Pilot newsroom in Norfolk, Virginia closes permanently. Tribune stops paying rent on offices in Allentown, Pennsylvania, Chicago, Aurora, Illinois, Orlando, and Newport News, Virginia, blaming the pandemic. May 2020, journalists earning over $40,000 are furloughed for 1 week each month through July, and some receive permanent pay cuts. The racial justice movement rises as the pandemic continues. On May 8th, only after furloughs and pay cuts are announced, Tribune's board suspends the company's cash dividend to shareholders. June 2020, Orlando Sentinel was sued for not paying rent from April to June. The Daily Press in Newport News, Virginia is sued for not paying rent from April to June. Tribune's cash balance, $80.5 million. July 2020, the Morning Call in Allentown, Pennsylvania is sued by its landlord, which claims it did not receive rent from April to July. Tribune extends its agreement with Alden, restricting the hedge fund from eclipsing a 33% share until June 2021. Alden co-founder Randall Smith assumes a seat on Tribune's board, resulting in Alden holding 3 seats on the 7-member board. Tribune closes its printing plant. It prints the Virginian Pilot in Norfolk, Virginia, outsources print production, and lays off 132 print and packaging workers. News deadlines are moved up several hours. Tribune board implements rights agreement, aka poison pill, with the goal of limiting shareholders from eclipsing Alden's stake. August, September 2020. Tribune announces the closing of the Daily News office in New York City. Tribune closes 4 newsroom buildings due to the pandemic. The Morning Call in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Capital Gazette in Annapolis, Maryland. The office serving the Elgin, Aurora, and Naperville newspaper staffs in Aurora, Illinois. Daily Press in Newport News, Virginia. Tribune reports third quarter results. Net income of $8.5 million, up 23% from the same period in 2019. Cash balance hits $90 million on September 27. October 2020. Hartford Courant announces printing will be outsourced. 151 employees laid off. Tribune closes Orlando Sentinel newsroom after nearly 70 years on October 30. November, December 2020. Tribune sells majority stake in Best Review's website, takes home $96 million. The Hartford Courant, the nation's oldest newspaper, leaves its Connecticut office after 75 years on December 27. An Alden subsidiary has listed the building for sale. On December 31st, Tribune disclosed Alden submitted a proposal December 14th to buy the company for $14.25 a share and formed a special committee to evaluate the proposal. January 2021, Chicago Tribune employees start to move out of the Prudential Building newsroom 3 years after the iconic Tribune Tower was sold to a developer. Its landlord sues Tribune for $4.8 million in unpaid rent. February 2021, Tribune board announces it has agreed to Alden acquisition. The move, if approved by 2/3 of the non-Alden shareholders, will take the company private. At $17.25 a share, Alden would pay more than $400 million for the 68% of the company it doesn't already own.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Our next speaker this evening is Evan Brandt. He's a reporter at the Pottstown Mercury, who will speak about his experiences working for a paper ravaged by Alden. The Pottstown Mercury is owned by Media News, which is an Alden newspaper company. Evan?
Thank you, Jen. Let me share my screen here. Here we go. So I work at a newspaper just down the road from Allentown, the Pottstown Mercury. We are a small newspaper in a town of about 23,000 people that is about 20 miles west of Philadelphia. And we are the smallest newspaper by circulation to have won 2 Pulitzer Prizes. A scrappy paper that always punched above its weight, as I like to say. When I started working there in 1997, there were 15 reporters, news and sports, and there are now 3.5. So as you can imagine, a lot of things get missed. What's happening to newspapers under Alden is happening all over the place. Alden is just the worst actor. Local news sites and local newspapers are closing throughout the country. And as you can see here, we've lost more than several thousand papers, and there are more than 3,000 counties in the United States which have no news source at all. And they're called news deserts. So Cathy gave a very stirring review of all of the important stories that the Virginian Pilot has done, but there are very real measurable benefits to people who have an active local news source. It increases voter turnout. It encourages split ticket voting, so folks don't just go in or vote for all Republican or all Democrat. It actually reduces government corruption and makes cities healthier. In fact, this has been proven to the point that the bonding companies which lend money to municipalities charge a higher interest rate if they don't have a local news source because they consider it more likely that there will be either corruption or mismanagement. There's a quote here from Joshua Benton, which I really like, and that's that local newspapers are basically little machines that spit out healthier democracies. And the best part is that you get to reap the benefits of those positive outcomes, even if you don't read them yourself. I have an example here from the city of Bell, California, which is out in Southern California near Los Angeles. And just a few years after the local paper there closed its doors, it was revealed that the city manager, Robert Rizzo, you can see him here, was paying himself a salary of $80,000 a year, which is more than the president makes. This is in a town where a quarter of the taxpayers live below the federal poverty line. And it wasn't until the Los Angeles Times launched a major investigation that any of these things were revealed. High property taxes, voter fraud at municipal elections. Several city council members ended up in jail, as did Robert Rizzo. This is the sort of thing that happens when you don't have a local news source around, which is why you want to keep your local newspaper alive. Local newspapers connect their readers to national events. This is a chart I did after the presidential election showing one of the 3 counties that the Mercury covers and how people voted in each of the towns. It helps people to understand their impact on large national events. And as it turns out, the margin by which Joseph Biden won Montgomery County was a large portion of the margin by which he won Pennsylvania. So this helps break that down so that our readers understood the impact of that. So why is it worse to be owned by a hedge fund than to be owned by any other corporation? First of all, unlike a corporation, a public corporation, the information is not available. Some of the things that Wendy shared with you in the presentation about stock price, about benefits, none of that stuff is available when you're dealing with a hedge fund. And Alden Global Capital is one of the worst. Nicholas Shaxson wrote a book about hedge funds, and he devoted an entire chapter to Alden because of what it does. So this is the sort of things that they do. They'll buy a company and they'll take all of its finances out of its location and move them to tax shelters, usually in the Cayman Islands or in the state of Delaware. They'll cut worker pay and staff. They put more of the health and benefit costs on the workers. And what they do is they look to consolidate all of these things like they did in Virginia and like they did outside Philadelphia. Alden owns all of the daily newspapers except in Bucks County surrounding Philadelphia. It owns papers in New Jersey and Delaware, Chester, Montgomery, and now Berks County. So it's able to share its resources, which would be fine if they were doing that to keep the company sustainable. But that's not what they do. All of the savings that they reap from these moves, they extract from the company, and they use it to buy other companies. They gut the company that they've owned, in this case, newspaper companies, and then they take that money and they invest it elsewhere. So a media analyst named Ken Doctor found out that Alden Global Capital's profits, he found this out from an insider since, as I've mentioned, they're private equity, so they don't need to report any of these things to the FCC, that they had made a 17% profit, which is unheard of in the newspaper industry. And in the cluster where I am, their profit was a whopping 30%, which is unheard of. So that's $158 million, none of which went into paying journalists, none of which went into paying photographers or improving circulation or even fixing up what few buildings they still owned. Instead, they used it and they bought a pharmacy company called Fred's Pharmacies, and they ran it into the ground by doing the exact same thing. So this will continue if Alden buys Tribune, and it's the sort of thing that you want to be very cautious about. Fewer reporters covering beats. So this is a local election year, and I recently went through the list of races to see what I would be doing in a local election year. There are 24 municipalities in Montgomery County that the Mercury covers. I'll be doing all of those elections. There are 9 primary elections with school boards that have multiple candidates, all of whom I'm going to have to try and explain to folks before they go to the polls next month about what they're going to do. So what you want to be concerned about in this larger concept of corporatization of news is how you lose the local flavor. You lose things like charts that show you how your voters voted in a presidential election. And what you get is this homogenized version of the news. So here are 3 papers in 3 very different parts of the country, all owned by the same corporation. And look how they covered the national election. And it's not just there. Here's 23 more from around the country doing the same thing. Here's more in Louisiana, Mississippi, New Jersey, Tennessee. This is what corporatization means. 8 papers in Connecticut. Everyone got the exact same news. And I'll end here. This is a page that shows local papers that do what local papers are supposed to do. So in Wilmington, Delaware, where Biden obviously was a senator, it's a local boy makes good story. So they have a very special cover there. The same with Scranton, Pennsylvania, where Biden grew up as a child. And I want to draw your attention to the 3rd one on the top there from the Casper Star Tribune. This newspaper handled the election exactly as a local newspaper should. First, obviously, they tell you the news of who won the presidential election, but then they looked at the results and they said, what does this say about the community we cover? What does this say about you? And they told folks that that the results were even more Republican, a deeper red than they had been in previous elections. And that's the sort of thing that a good local newspaper does. It reflects the community so that the community can look at itself, and it exposes local problems. And you're going to lose that with all of the resources that will be lost if Alden Global Capital takes over Tribune.
Thank you so much, Evan. We appreciate you being here tonight and sharing that with us. Louisa, could you please introduce our next speaker?
Thank you, Evan and Jen. It is my honor to introduce our next speaker, Congresswoman Marie Newman, who represents Illinois' 3rd Congressional District, which includes some of Chicago's Southwest Side neighborhoods and their surrounding suburbs, who will speak about the importance of saving local news. Representative Newman.
Well, thank you and good evening to everyone. And I just want to compliment our speakers so far. These are all critically important comments about moments. I like the timeline for a number of reasons, because it shows how insidious this VC, PE firm and a hedge fund activity is. I saw it up close and personal, not just watching this trajectory, but in other industries. I'm a former management consultant and watched the very same metaphorical raping and pillaging, tossing it aside, and then allowing them to be fend for themselves. And the people that always suffered the most were staff, rank and file staff, every single time. So I think you did a beautiful job of articulating how this trajectory works and how similar it is every single time. Particularly devastating, I will say, is the fact that nobody has any control over it. These folks have no accountability. That typically, just so you know, VC firms, PE firms, and hedge funds do not have boards like regular companies do. They just run rampant. So thank you for all your comments, and it is great to be here this evening, and I appreciate being a part of it. You know, I echo what everybody has said here. I think everybody's made some great comments. And I think that we continue to see the devastation here in Chicago regarding the Tribune, is that these fearless reporters continue to fight on and do great things through severe cost cutting and furloughing reporters. So you can have your colleague with you one week and then they're gone the next. It is, it's very sad. I see it. The mass layoffs and pay cuts are devastating to everyone. These newsrooms have been absolutely gutted. And I appreciated the reporter's comments regarding that he was going to be, I counted, I think 15 races he was going to be following. That's, by the way, that's literally impossible, just so everybody knows how that works. You know, this is a industry that has been gutted during the pandemic because of the nature of the economic environment. But then to be gutted further by this rape and pillage activity from their owner is beyond depraved. You know, I think what everyone is looking for is just accurate, up-to-minute information that reflects the community. I think Adam said it, Evan or Adam, I'm so sorry, I don't remember the last speaker's name, but he said it beautifully, is that you just want your news to reflect your community and be accurate and be honest and find the truth, right? In fact, that's why we turn to our local newspapers. In fact, the newspapers, you know, notoriously, and I won't say that because we don't have any TV friends here to defend themselves, but frequently, because of the nature of the printed word, you tend to you're forced to tell the truth a lot better and faster. But as journalists, your role in supporting a healthy democracy truly never diminished during the pandemic. I think that you worked harder and faster to get people what they needed during a very trying time. And I think that the need has intensified. What I have noted in my own behavior is that I am, in my office, I am reading more papers every day than I did before, because the importance of what they provide, and not just online. So I will continue to subscribe, very obviously, and I hope everyone does. And I hope everyone here is a good ambassador and continues to ask everybody to subscribe to all these papers. And you know, Tribune and the papers that are being discussed here this evening are not the only papers that have been devastated by hedge funds. There's many of them, you know, and the news desert that we talked about earlier in our discussion today is real. I think we even see it in some suburbs here in the Chicago area, that we have these voids and these gaps. And you know what I'm seeing more of? And we saw it on that page that our colleague tonight talked about, is that the cut and paste of, and then just putting a new headline on. That's not how news works. That's not how it should never work. And devastates communities, because then they're treated like every other community. You know, and one of the biggest thing here is, I think that when a hedge fund comes in, they think that the fastest and best way to make something profitable is to pay workers less. And honestly, you know, I've been in the nonprofit industries and across business, and never has it worked. In 30 years of my career, when you pay workers less, it has never worked. So this notion that they think they have magic sauce around it is crazy. But they continue to do it, as we all know. This destruction across the news industry must stop, and we all must keep speaking out about it. And so that's why I'm glad that we're, you know, discussing this tonight. You know, someone gave me a little bit of information about what some of the tactics they're using and what's happening at the Chicago Tribune here in town, and heard that Tribune Publishing offered reporters a $400 bonus in exchange for the company being able to fire them at any point for any reason. Who is going to sign that document, and who is going to take that money? I mean, you know, these are all false and crazy choices. And you know what I say to all of that? You should have a big card that you carry around saying, hell no. That's my recommendation. You know, and let's talk about how these folks are treated in the newsroom. They're being overworked like nothing I've seen. I talk to reporters occasionally, and they are more than overworked right now. That's why I'm just really proud tonight to be here and to support organizations like the Chicago Tribune Guild, which is fighting for better pay, better benefits, and stronger voice in the newsroom. And I'm going to continue that, and I will be your ambassador. And I'm so proud of my partner, CWA. I know Seal is on the call today, and really appreciate that partnership, and want everyone to know that I will be there for them and happy to step up anytime that you need me. And you know, what I will say lastly is that supporting your local newsroom, whether it is the smallest of papers or the mighty Chicago Tribune, we all can extend ourselves into the community. And the real reason that reporters exist and journalism exists is because we need truth. So if I can ask everybody to be truth ambassadors as they move throughout their day and support these wonderful institutions and the workers and the journalists, I think we'll all be in a better space. And I truly appreciate all that you are doing, and I appreciate the opportunity to chat tonight. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. We really appreciate it. So the next portion of our evening is a short video, and it's a group of videos that we took with our community allies and our readers, because these are the folks that are so important to us and really the reason that we're fighting the way that we are. So we're going to present the video.
It's difficult enough when news organizations cut in order to retain or make more profits, and we see smaller news staffs. What happens when Alden has come into papers is that they continue that cutting.
And the first thing they did, it seemed like, was sell out the assets out from under, which is kind of a trademark of things going a different direction. And from there, just the slow decrease in number of reporters and the coverage that we had in this area. So that was certainly concerning.
I know from experience, having worked previously in newspapers that have gone through cuts and had bad faith owners, the arts are one of the first things to go. And what we see then is when arts coverage suffers in a city, the arts themselves will begin to suffer. And once that happens in a great American city, the city itself begins to suffer.
Those simple things that kind of cohesively glue a community together gets lost. And so what do you have? You have folks getting push alerts from national news organizations, but they don't know what's happening at their city hall, or they don't know what's happening at their school board.
I read to learn how issues of poverty and homelessness impact our region. Sometimes New Bethany contributes to this dialogue as the largest homeless service provider in the city of Bethlehem. And when this happens, we are a part of the story that other residents come to depend on to learn how a community comes together to support our neighbors.
I have been a subscriber to the Chicago Tribune and the Evanston Review for more than 45 years. I like the suburban paper because it highlights those issues that are important to me as an Evanston resident. I like the Chicago Tribune because it even gives a broader focus on what's going around me and in the world. It's my hope that these two newspapers will continue on the path that they have done for so long.
I definitely see the value in the local news. I think it's definitely one of the pillars of the community.
The fact that there is an opposition viewpoint is something that we in democracy have a responsibility to protect. The Current actually published the entirety of the Declaration of Independence. If we had lost the war, they would have been considered treasonous for publishing such a document.
Yeah.
That was, to me, even back then, the independence of the press to get the news out. So when we think about that power, the founding of this country, and the important integrity that we have for journalistic objectivity and transparency, it begins right with the Current.
If things are going awry, folks won't know. They can't make decisions if they don't know what's going on, and that's what we're here for. And when there's fewer of us to tell those stories, then those stories simply aren't being told.
One thing I try to teach my kids is the importance of a strong local paper. Sadly, the Sun's legacy is in danger. My colleagues are fighting really hard to return the Sun to local control, and you can help. Go to SaveOurBaltimoreSun.com. Help us save our Sun. Do it for my kids, do it for yours.
Thank our community allies across the country. And it is now my pleasure and honor to introduce, again, from the Chicago Tribune, it is an honor especially to introduce our Congresswoman, Jan Schakowsky, who represents Illinois' 9th Congressional District, which includes some of Chicago's north and northwest side neighborhoods and nearby villages and cities, who will speak about saving our papers. Representative Schakowsky.
It's such an honor and a pleasure, and this has just been a really terrific presentation. I liked the way you began, Jen, with made a decision to stand up and fight. And you know what happens? When we fight, we win. And so we need to gather all of our supporters and engage in this fundamental campaign. I really appreciated the stories from Evan and Cathy about the heroic work of their papers and the history of their papers for unveiling things that are so important in the community, and doing it for such a long time. To lose that is just tragic. And it's tragic for our democracy. 2 weeks ago, as the chair of the Consumer Protection Subcommittee in the Congress, we had Mark Zuckerberg, we had Jack Dorsey, he's Twitter, and Mr. Pichai, who is Google. And what we talked about was misinformation and disinformation and the seeding of violence that's been happening online, and the lack of trust now that people can really have, even questioning what is true anymore online, on the internet. And Americans need to turn to their newspapers to get the real information. There is a truth to be told. That's such a basic idea. And where do you find that truth? You can find it in the newspapers. We're figuring out now, how do we hold these platforms accountable for the kind of damage that they're doing in our country, and how can we? But newspapers are supposed to be held accountable. But it's also the variety of news, the quality of news, the kind of information that is disseminated. And when I say our very democracy is at stake in this kind of battle, I really believe that. I believe that we have to have a place to go where we can have some confidence. And even, and when you get opinion pieces, you may get one opinion, another opinion, but all of that is so important. And the fact that it's local, it's about your neighborhood, it's about your city, it's about your state. I think, as Marie mentioned, it's not a cut and paste kind of a scheme, and it is a scheme. This is about money. You've talked about that, it's just about making more money. And so I think just, the role that journalism itself has played down the years, the ethic behind good journalism that makes us safer. What are you going to do? So I want to thank the journalists that are here today, every part of the newspaper that you represent, and know that there are people and lots of people, and we have to mobilize people to stand with you in this battle. To what did you say, John? We're going to stand up and fight. So this is really an organizing effort too. I'm so proud to stand with CWA, with the various unions that are represented at the newspapers, and I like to consider myself an organizer to help work with you so that we can bring the change. I do have a question I want to ask about the Chicago Tribune, because I've heard that there has been an offer of two very rich people that is being considered to buy the Tribune instead of Alden Global Capital. So I'm hoping that kind of thing will emerge, that we'll find people who, for the right reasons, want to buy and continue the newspapers and the wonderful work that they do. So thank you so much. Count me in as an ally. Marie and I will be working together to gather our members to fight this very, very important fight. So we're fighting for the truth. We're fighting for our democracy. We're fighting for the workers who have been so abused. And I believe that we can win this battle. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all of your words. We really appreciate it. And we loved your dog too.
Eleanor and Franklin, my two dogs.
Oh, I'm a huge dog person, so I really appreciated that. Dogs barking for journalism. Okay, so moving on to our next segment is another slideshow on what we've lost. So all of our newspapers took a hard look at what beats are not being covered. And these are beats that are not being covered as of Alden's involvement. We had a long string of buyouts that took place, and we've had a lot of people leave us. And so that's affected our coverage. So we're going to present our slideshow now, and it is again narrated by Wendy Fox Weber from the Chicago suburbs.
What we have lost. Cuts at the morning call, 22% of staff lost. No dedicated reporter for Easton, a county seat. Only one person covering all arts and entertainment. Only two people covering all crime and courts. No reporter covering school districts in Allentown, Bethlehem, or Easton, or covering higher education. No more editors for sports, business, politics, or state news. Cuts at the Baltimore Sun, 10% of staff lost. No investigative reporters. No sports editor for a period of more than a year. Only one reporter covering the arts. Of the 8 reporters who shared the 2020 Pulitzer Prize for local reporting for coverage that led to a mayor's resignation and federal conviction, only 3 remain. Cuts at the Chicago Tribune, 32% of staff lost. No reporters dedicated to South Side or West Side. No reporters based in the state and national capitals. No reporters dedicated to transportation or architecture. No reporters dedicated to contemporary music. Weekly Spanish language newspaper Hoy was eliminated in a city where roughly 1/3 of the population is Latinx. Cuts at the suburban Chicago Tribune newspapers. 32% of staff lost. No more than 4 reporters at the 4 remaining suburban papers in areas in some of the largest cities in Illinois. No reporters at all in Elgin or Waukegan. All content is freelance, but from other areas. Only one reporter covering arts and entertainment. Cuts at the Hartford Courant, 30% of staff lost. Only one editor directing coverage of politics, business, and community, state, and breaking news. No features or opinion editors. No transportation, immigration, or environment beats, or monthly Hartford magazine. Only 3 reporters covering the total population of 770,000 in the 24 municipalities surrounding Hartford. Cuts at the Virginian Pilot and Daily Press, Hampton Roads, Virginia, 33% of staff lost. Only 4 photographers. Only 1 reporter covering state government, the legislature, and the governor's office. Only 1 opinion editor for both the Virginian Pilot and the Daily Press. No reporters covering Suffolk or the counties of York, Gloucester, Matthews, or Isle of Wight. No beat reporters for transportation, environment, business, shipyard industry. Costs down, profits up. Meanwhile, Tribune Alden had about $190 million in cash on its balance sheet at the end of 2020. $138 million decrease in total operating expenses. At the same time, $36 million net increase in cash from a year earlier. 30% increase in digital-only subscribers. 57% in digital content revenues. All of this on the backs of a 30.4% smaller workforce, reduced from 4,114 Tribune workers in 2019 to 2,865 workers a year later, as of December 27, 2020.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Our next speaker is Lillian Reed. She's an education reporter at the Baltimore Sun. We're going to hear from her tonight about the Sun's really successful program to bring local ownership to the Baltimore Sun, and it gives us a little bit of a ray of hope. Lily.
So about a year ago, at the beginning of the timeline that we saw one of the presenters show earlier, a group of us in Baltimore took a look at Alden and their plans to come into Tribune, and we decided to take action. We worked together and launched the Save Our Sun campaign, which really at its core was aimed at raising awareness across Maryland as to the newspaper situation. We wanted to act as journalists and share with everyone what was going on, not just because it affected the journalists in the room, but because ultimately, as Evan has pointed out, it affects communities at the end of the day. And we worried that there wasn't enough awareness of Alden's movings in and out of Tribune, which I think is what they tend to count on. We called for the Sun through our Save Our Sun campaign we wanted the newspaper to be returned to, local ownership, and for it to be turned into a more sustainable nonprofit model. So we launched a petition drive. We got more than 6,000 signatures from a very wide range of people in our area. It was business leaders and sports figures, lawmakers, grassroots organizations, members of the arts community, so much more. And we later learned in December that Maryland businessman Stuart Bainum had answered our calls for help. In the fall, he negotiated what was a tentative deal with Alden to purchase the Baltimore Sun, and he announced his intentions to turn the Sun into a nonprofit, which was exactly what we were hoping would be in the cards for the future of the paper. So those negotiations have fallen apart. We still, however, have a lot to be hopeful for, because Stuart Bainum has now set his sights on purchasing all of Tribune Publishing. Other civic-minded individuals and investors are clearly watching this closely. Since Mr. Bainum announced plans to make an offer for the company, more civic-minded individuals have stepped forward in other cities. And right now, the group has expressed interest in returning more of Tribune's newspapers to local ownership, not just the Baltimore Sun. So I believe very strongly in what we're doing here. I believe that if we spend time talking with the community and talking with one another about what's going on, we can crack this together. We won't give up, because the papers need to be kept safe from hedge funds like Alden Global. And we're optimistic that what happens here could be a model for the rest of the industry and benefit communities across the country, preserving the journalism, but also preserving the democracy, which we know these two things are tied very closely together.
Thank you so much, Lily. Appreciate it. So I'm going to toss it over to Louisa, who's going to coordinate we have a Q&A function up at the top, which I know a lot of you have been using. If you have a question, please raise your hand and someone will call on you, and we will do our best to answer your questions. I see in the Q&A, we did have a lot of questions about Stuart Bainum. Hopefully some of what Lily mentioned kind of answers those questions, but I think generally speaking, we're hopeful. What we're going to continue to work in our communities to spread the word about why it's so important for our papers to be owned locally, and just like Lily said, to bring in local ownership back to our communities.
Jen, there seems to be some interest in the prospect of these new developments and what confidence people have. And I'd be really interested in hearing from folks on the panel, because there's several others who wanted to know about that too. That seems like such a,
sure.
Is that, are we being falsely optimistic there, or is that a real prospect?
I mean, I feel optimistic, but you know, again, it's one of those things that it seems to change every day. And I think there's definitely, you know, cause that something could go awry, but you know, that's why we're doing this panel tonight. That's why we're continuing to meet with people in the community, you know, to educate everyone about what we're going through and why, you know, it's so important. And I think that's one of the great benefits to having a forum like this, is that we can continue to get the message out there.
Thank you so much, Jen and Cathy. And I am back, and I am actually now seeing questions in our Q&A. And thank you all so much for being so kind and patient, because we are still in the middle of a pandemic. So again, if we hadn't said this already, if you have a question, please raise your hand and I will try to call you forward. If not, I'm going to move into the questions that we've already had in our Q&A. And so our first question that's still open in our Q&A is Ken Davis asks, Would federal legislation of some kind be helpful in facilitating not-for-profit news organizations? And I think Representative Schakowsky are.
Actually, I was just getting my pen ready to write down what suggestions you organizers may have of what you would like to see happen. We need an ask here that we can try and deliver. And I think the atmosphere may be right because of the loss of trust that people have in information, especially online, to keep our local newspapers. So is there some suggestion for national legislation? I'm all ears.
Well, we're very glad to hear that you're all ears. And we have across our guilds under Tribune Publishing, we are working with our local officials, and there definitely are some proposals that are out there. So we very much appreciate you being our ally. And Ken, so much thank you for asking that question. I want to move on to the next question again, too, is from Jim Anfield. As readers of the paper's Chicago Tribune, thank you. What can we do? So I can tell you specifically as a Chicago Tribune reporter, and I think that we can say this for all of our papers across the guilds, is that it's very important for us if you continue supporting us, being our audience, subscribing. One of the big questions people ask is, should I still subscribe? Yes. I still personally subscribe, even though I could get my newspapers for free for my 86 and 87-year-old parents. Not only because it does show the support for our papers, but also because it engages you, and then also has our management know that you are an engaged audience member, engaged reader. And quite frankly, that is the most important voice as far as we're concerned, our audience. And so then we also have a question, let's see, from Kim Schaefer. Can you talk specifically about steps we can each take in our communities? And yes, how can we support federal legislation? We only have a few more minutes left, but specifically, for example, Jen and Lily, what have people been doing specifically in your communities?
I'll go first if that's okay. So one of the things that I noticed this week is that we've had more letters to the editor from our readers, and that's as a result of an Allentown forum we had last week, where we encourage folks to write a letter to the editor just to express why they value their newspaper and why it should be owned locally by civic-minded owners. I really appreciate that as a journalist, just to see that support just from folks that read our work. Would highly encourage folks, to do that. Evan actually has something to add on that.
Evan.
So
something else that that regular people can do is to support their local publication or their public news site on social media. I can tell you from personal experience that the Mercury Facebook page is a truly toxic place. And there are lots of places where everyone comes on, lots of trolls saying, I don't believe anything you say. Why do I have to pay for the paper? And I'm always really thankful that there are a couple of readers who come on who understand the situation, who explain, listen, news isn't free. You need to pay people to go out and to get these stories. If you want news for free, just look at your friend's Facebook page and you can take that for what it's worth. But if you want someone who's going to go out and who's going to investigate these things, then there needs to be a way to pay people to do that professionally. You don't get shoes for free. You don't get your food for free just because you want it. Why you think your news should be free has been a mystery to me. I also think it's important that people understand that things are going to change no matter what. So there's a next stage to all of this. So we all want Stuart Bainham and Mr. Wiss to buy Tribune, and then they want to spin off some of those papers to local ownership. So we need to start asking ourselves, what's the local ownership going to look like? Who's going to take these papers off these very generous millionaires and billionaires who are buying them and want to pass them on to responsible owners? I think there are any number of local models, local ownership models, local community foundations. If the paper's small enough, they may be able to buy it. If you become a nonprofit, then sometimes your subscriptions, much like, and Cathy will be familiar with this model, it's like when you're a PBS member, you're a member, you're not a subscriber, and your membership fee is tax deductible. And maybe that's something that the Representative Schakowsky can look into, about whether or not is there anything that prevents newspapers from following a model like that. So become involved in the conversation locally, because there's going to have to be what's next. And I'm not sure that we're all prepared for that yet. We're all biting our nails watching to see what happens with this contest.
Thank you so much, Evan. And before I go to you, Lily, I just want to mention that some of our stories have been free. I mean, at the Chicago Tribune, and I know a lot of papers across the country under Tribune Publishing, especially during the very beginning of the coronavirus, we had specifically marked some of the stories that had to deal with the pandemic were available to everyone. But absolutely, it does take funding to produce these stories. But Lily, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, so I wanted to just jump in with a few ideas for folks, since we just had a big rally in Baltimore this past weekend. So we were answering that exact question. And one of the things that we asked folks to do was to consider submitting some kind of resolution or request for a resolution with their local governments, supporting local newspapers and their importance in the community, and advocating that hedge funds are not allowed in those scenes. I think that sends a strong message, because at the end of the day, we don't know what's going on with these negotiations. We can only support from afar. And I think whatever we can do to keep the pressure on, to let Alden and other such financial groups know that they're not welcome in getting involved in the journalism industry, I think that every little bit helps. So that's another idea for folks if they haven't thought of that.
That's great. Thank you so much, Lily. And I just want to mention before I go to you, Cathy, is that we do see your questions in the Q&A. We wish we could spend all night talking to interested parties about how to save our papers, but we will have follow-up information in more detail from Jen in just a moment. But Cathy, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I wanted to underscore what Evan said about pushing back in public spaces, in the Facebook comments and all of that, because it's not only important for others to know that we feel the way we do, it is increasingly, in my observation, dangerous for reporters out there, particularly women and people of color. I've seen that. There've been a lot of national stories when we talk about issues of race. They can really be let in for some very significant abuse. So, I just think we can't be bystanders in that, and I think we've got to act forcefully when we see other people acting in abusive ways to people who are doing their jobs. And it's scary, but I feel this rhetoric rising. I've seen it rise in the last couple of years, and I just feel like it's really important. If we care about truth and we care about integrity, then we also have to care about the personal safety of the people who are in some cases really putting themselves in dangerous situations to bring us those things. So thank you, Evan. I just wanted to underscore that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Cathy. And we have seen recently the coverage, the Stop Asian Hate campaign that's been happening, and actually Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong, who still is a major shareholder under Tribune Publishing, spoke about that very recently as well. And so we appreciate those allies across the board. And so I just want to say thank you so much again to all of our speakers and to the community who has joined us across the country. We so appreciate you taking time on an early spring day. And before I toss it back to Jen, I just want to say thank you so much to Jen Sheehan, my colleague as a reporter and as a superhero, everybody who is in front of me.
Oh my gosh.
She has lost so much, so much sleep over all of this. And someday, I'm going to say this as a dare, a promise, that we are going to sit down and share deep dish pizza and Scrapple sometime in person. So Jen.
We'll mash up our two regional food things,
right?
Put them together. I would love that, Louisa. Thank you so much. So we're going to wrap up our talk tonight. Thank you so much for all of you for coming tonight. One quick thing, anybody that is on this tonight will be receiving an email in hopefully in about an hour, which will outline some of the things that you can do to help us. And I know a lot of the questions that we've gotten tonight and we've gotten kind of throughout this process is how our community can help us. And we greatly appreciate and greatly need all of the help from our community allies and our readers. I mentioned the letters to the editor. We also have an open letter that we're building signatures for. There's going to be a link in the email to that open letter. We would appreciate your signatures on that. And we've also listed contact emails for all of the different newspapers, our committees, because we would love to hear from you. So there will be email contacts listed so that you can reach out to the paper that you care about very much. Thank you so much to everyone that has been on tonight. Thank you to all of our speakers. I greatly appreciate you taking the time to hear our story.